Alright, so women mature psychologically faster than men. So the objectives here that I'm proposing are that myelination differences occur in compared to boys versus girls, pruning, which has seen the reduction in the number of streamlines occurring earlier in women, and the development of cerebellum, which has seen total cerebellum volume, which occurs earlier in women. The first piece of evidence I reviewed was a peer-reviewed journal called Developmental Differences in White Matter Architecture Between Boys and Girls. It investigated children aged 5 to 18 by using a DTI, which is diffusion tension imaging, and it was a study relative to white matter regions. Shown in the top right-hand corner is white matter and how it's all over the brain. It contains neurons and axons and is covered by a layer of myelin, also known as myelin sheath. Therefore, it shows information on how the brain's maturing. Myelination is one of the 4 primary ways that the network of neurons in the brain changes during the process of developing in adolescence and all the way until early adulthood. It's a process of the myelin sheath insulating the axons. Much of the process is completed by the age of 5, however, it's continued through the developmental period. So fractional anisotropy illustrates these differences in myelination occurring in the brain. As you can see in the image above, the myelin sheath is covering the axons. And this process is an example of how the brain's maturing. This study found that girls have greater myelination, which was shown by the higher fractional anisotropy values. So therefore this implies the differences illustrated in development of a female's brain structure to a male's brain structure. And it shows that a female's brain structure is developing earlier comparative to that of a male's. The next study I reviewed was titled Preferential Detachment During Human Brain Development, Age and Sex-Specific Structural Connectivity in Diffusion Tensor Imaging Data. It was another peer-reviewed journal and it looked at 121 participants from 4 to 40 years old. And similarly, it used DTI data to find the effects of the number of fiber tracts at the level of streamlines. Now quickly, fiber tracts just refer to axons and send messages to other neurons. But this is all in relation to pruning, which is another example of how the network of neurons in the brain change over the course of development. So pruning refers to neutrons dying and the retraction of axons that may be making unnecessary connections, which is seen in that bottom right photo where where a large amount, prior to pruning, there's a lot of connections and then it kind of simplifies and effectively eases communication. So the results of the study show us that males had approximately 800 more streamlines than females across age. As you can see in the top right-hand corner, as you get older, slowly those streamlines decrease as communication becomes more and more effective. So we're saying that that's happening earlier in females. Both males and females have decreases in streamlines as expected, as they're both developing and psychologically maturing, but it is the earlier age of females that's significant and can be linked to females maturing psychologically earlier than men. The next peer-reviewed journal I looked at was titled Cerebellum Development During Childhood and Adolescence, a longitudinal morphometric MRI study. This one looked at 25 healthy females and 25 healthy males from 5 to 24 years old. It studied the cerebellum and its development through anatomic brain MRI scans. So what is the cerebellum? The cerebellum is well known for being responsible for motor skills, coordination and balance, but also contributes to cognitive and emotional functions. Therefore, it's required to develop through adolescence and early adulthood. And yeah, although is well known for its motor skills, previous studies have also shown the importance it has in emotional regulation. They first looked at the subsection of the sample, which was just from ages 7 to 11, and found that the adult volume actually occurred in females, but it hadn't occurred yet in males. This implies that the cerebellum still had time to develop and was still developing at the age of 11 for males, compared to females, which had already had a substantial amount of development. Furthermore, this was backed by the total cerebellum volume, where it said the age of females peaked at 11.8 years, which is significantly less than males who peaked at the age of 15.6 years. It concludes that there's likely a sex difference in terms of psychological maturity, because the male's maturity is prolonged comparative to that of their female's counterpart. So, evaluating my evidence. A pro of the evidence we used was there's peer-reviewed. This means the research has been checked and reassured by other researchers, ensuring credibility of the information I use. It's also been scientifically experimented, which means they use the proper processes and ensure reliable data. A con, however, is that the peer-reviewed journals were rather dated, which means that they were longer than 10 years ago, some of them, and it doesn't allow for new and further research that is kind of more up to date. Also, too, I have to mention the possibility for incorrect interpretation on my behalf, whereby through looking at all the findings and complicated terminology, I may have made errors. That is a possibility. So, in conclusion, the question at the start kind of asks us, what is the evidence that women mature faster psychologically than men? And the assertion I've made is that women do mature psychologically faster than men. And I feel like through the evidence, it tells us that it's been seen in the greater amount of white matter in superior areas of the brain for females comparable to males. This therefore links to that myelination process that we were occurring, and that it's occurring earlier in the female brain comparative to males. Secondly, the decrease in streamlines in females. This links to pruning and how the pruning process occurs earlier in females as they make that connections and allow for communication to flow easier earlier on than males. And finally, the cerebellum, which is a part of the brain, reaches total volume at a far earlier age than males. So these three factors are all relevant to why I think that women do mature psychologically faster than men.